This group wants to live in a micro community of tiny homes. This one wants to live in an agri-hood, and they want it to be big enough to support teachers, and they want affordable housing. So there's all these different permutations of and scopes of vision that I'm just getting inundated. And right now, my challenge is to learn how to sense the connections between them, because I sense that they don't know each other. That I tell them that this isn't the first time someone's come to me with this longing. There's so many people that it's clearly emerging. It's not just my personal love of community and longing for designing intentional community. I'm surrounded by it, and it's so hopeful for me, because it feels like it has different momentum to it than before.
Welcome to the Regenerative Real Estate Podcast, a show about human environments and how they can be used as a force for good. Conversations that educate and inspire people looking for a different way to do real estate. I'm Neil Collins, and on this episode, I'm joined by David Todd, a partner at Latitude and someone who has been strengthening communities through regenerative real estate practices for more than 2 decades. For the better part of the last decade, my wife Alyssa and I lived in Portland, Oregon. And when the pandemic hit, our world, like so many others, got pretty small. Our daycare was canceled for our child. We sold the office building that we were working out of. And we are in the swirl of our parents going through some pretty intense cancer treatments. But it was these challenging times that created the conditions to bring forth the conversations that we're having around regenerative real estate now. You see, during this time, we were really lucky to have neighbors, the Arnold family, that we're able to really come together to chat about what regenerative real estate really is. For James and Ani Arnold, they are the owners of JRA Green Building, a deep green, high-performance custom home building company. And while our kids would be jumping on the trampoline or running down the sidewalk with their scooters, we would spend hours talking about healthy buildings, local food, alternative finance, and community resilience. Throughout that time, James kept telling me, Neil, it's too bad you never had the opportunity to meet my buddy David Todd. He moved to the East Coast, but he's been doing this work for years. You two would have really hit it off. Well, fortunately for me, David and my paths did cross not too much longer after that. And true to his word, James is right. David Todd is someone that has been walking the regenerative path before the word ever entered into people's vocabulary. As you'll hear on this episode, David is a community weaver and field builder that has used real estate as a medium in which he helps bring people together. David is aligned towards a purpose, and he does this with such poise and tenacity. David now lives in the Hudson Valley in upstate New York, where if you're in the area, you'll recognize that he's at it again, using his gifts of community organizing and genuine curiosity to forge connections and harness the potential that is embedded within people and groups. It is my real pleasure to not only have the opportunity to work intimately with David at Latitude, but for the first and certainly not the last time, welcome David Todd onto the show. Well, David, what I'm excited about today is we get to have a conversation on the Regenerative Real Estate Podcast that's a long time coming. And for most of the guests that come onto the podcast, I've either been introduced from a mutual acquaintance or I've reached out cold to inquire whether they want to come onto the show. But we've known each other for a while. You're a partner in Latitude that we work intensively on together. And I really admire you as a colleague and as a partner. I know some of your backstory, but I don't know all of it. And I certainly don't know how you've woven together a practice that has so much depth to it. And where I do love to start out is I want to get into who you are as a person. What are those moments that really catalyzed you into a direction into working with people and land and place and communities?
Hmm. Yeah, I think it's a bit of that longing for it somehow inherently from a very early age, in contrast to a fairly isolated suburban childhood. And just growing up in the American dream of my parents, were growing themselves and kind of moving from development to development or neighborhood to neighborhood. But it was new development to new development in suburban Chicago. And I had plenty of friends and relationships, but also, like, for some reason, I also always had a sense that I wasn't going to stay, that I was longing for something else. And some of it came from an imagination, and some of it came from going to summer camp and getting to go whitewater rafting and getting a taste of wilderness that kind of planted a seed. Like, there's a lot of wilderness out west. And I always kind of sensed like that once I finished some kind of compulsory things in my life, meaning high school and college, then I'm going west. And I did that. I pretty much left immediately after. I went way west. You might even say far east. I went to Japan first, but then immediately came back and then was in Portland. And there were other chapters in between that were shorter of kind of really testing that out and going on a road trip with my now wife when we were boyfriend, girlfriend, where we took about 6 months in the car and both had that longing for wilderness and the ocean and the mountains and rivers. She's also a Midwestern kid. So that road trip, I think, if I like come back to your question, the road trip was a catalyzing event of really seeing the great vast beauty and just really deep appreciation for creation. I use the broadest word, like outside of really environment or nature, just amazing, just awe that we experienced. That was huge. And having that, and also feeling like my teen years, let's say, I was in a place where it was a garage community, very auto-centric community, and wonder, like, I see in movies those neighborhoods where people would, they just walk out their door, they're on their front porches and they're walking into these kind of old town centers, and just having that longing, like, oh, I never had that. I would love to experience that someday, to feel like I'm nestled in a neighborhood where I knew my neighbors, I knew the store owner, I knew the hardware store owner, and just kind of could go and feel known and know them and recognized. So a little bit of actual media planted that seed, and then the lived experience of river rafting and then wanting more wilderness kind of gave that weaving of love of really, just miraculous creation, and then also longing for that nestled community of like a little walkable neighborhood that had still that kind of romantic idea, what felt like a romantic idea to me, because I'd grown up around big box stores in a suburban environment. But I saw images of small shop owners that knew who they were serving, and that people, yeah, just that kind of familiarity and sense of belonging that people have, that I thought and I imagined, and I wanted to find a way to cultivate that and make that my reality.
I don't want to project my story onto yours, but I recognize common points of adventure and travel and seeking. What was that inner desire in order to find community and make your own way in it? Like, what was that, an occupation that brought you ultimately to Portland? Was that still murky? How did you start to put those pieces together? Because I know that there was a stint as a teacher and things like that in there. And
Mm-hmm.
I'm not here to
Yeah.
tell your own story, but I want to connect those dots for myself personally.
Yeah, I think I remember also like observing my mom is a really strong entrepreneur and worked a lot, was very passionate about her work. And there's a little bit of that, like, oh, I don't want to do business because I saw how much it consumed her. And I, just longed for her attention. I definitely got it. She's a great mom. It's not that, but it was also a bit of an edge for me to think like, business, it becomes an all consuming pursuit. So I sought things that weren't business. So I went into education where I thought I could feel the sense of reward and relationship and contribution. And it wasn't tied to commerce in a direct way. So that's what my orientation towards teaching originally was, my way to find purpose that wasn't tied to commerce, that I could be a valuable contributor to a community. And I definitely always felt like I wanted to contribute and be of service, to the point that my grandmother, I remember when I was about 15 years old, she said, just please don't become a poor preacher, meaning giving myself in service in such a way that I really give up myself in that way, what she perceived as too self-sacrificing. And she worried about that in me from an early age. So I don't know where that came from, because that kind of is pre-conscious for me, that I just always remember feeling that sense of service. But so that sense of service led me to teach overseas. Here's the other thing about me is I always seemed to go in through the side door. I wanted to teach, but I didn't want a teaching degree. So I knew in Chicago I could teach with any bachelor's degree, but it didn't have to be an education degree or certificate. I could be a substitute teacher and seek out maternity leave, long-term stints, so I could still be a part of a department and do long-term teaching, but not have a teaching degree. So for a couple of years, I kind of wedged my way into education to get exposure and be in the classroom and be with kids and feel a part of the community. But it was kind of a sideways thing. And I have somewhat of an aversion to business, credentials, and straightforward paths, where I just have insisted on a winding journey almost to a fault. So that led me to Portland, where we were going for many reasons. And I did a master's in education at Lewis and Clark, where I taught secondary language arts, or I was, certified and endorsed to teach secondary language arts, because I loved writing. And I taught a lot of things, but it was always with a love of the writing process. 30 years later, I still write almost daily, and often just for myself. So it is the process is what I love about it more than the product. So that was my way to kind of in through the side door. And then eventually the master's was an authentic direct path to endorsement and certification. So then I kind of resigned myself to go a more traditional route to gain that credential and be able to be in the classroom. And even at that time, though, I also had a childhood where I did a lot of artwork and making things, and loved making things. I studied a lot of art in school, but it was always from the lens of I wanted to be an architect, was one of the things I would have said when I was young. But again, I didn't want to go directly at it. So I didn't choose architecture school. I do a lot of sculpture class and learned about actually 3D fabrication, and just thought like, I'm going to find a way to design and build. So then I was kind of holding education, writing process, building and designing things, and then just wilderness and nature and just love. Like then I kind of discovered permaculture and was like, what is all this leading towards? And it still felt nebulous. And teaching was a place where I felt like my work, I was in right relationship with it. I felt fine about it, but I still felt like it wasn't right. It wasn't as rewarding as I thought it was going to be. And an interesting thing was I was wearing so many hats, and like a parent to a lot of my students, because I was in a very specific school environment with a very small student body that needed a lot of support. And I found myself giving a lot. And I did not have the coping skills as a young teacher to give that much and imagine creating a family. And I was at a place of starting to want a family. And at the same time, in wanting a family, I realized when I have a child, I'm probably going to homeschool them or send them to Waldorf school. Yet I'm a teacher here. Like something's incongruent. Like I'm doing this and I don't believe in it, because I wouldn't send my own child to this experience. I need to get out of education. And how do I use my love of the built environment, ecology, wilderness, nature, gardening. Even I had done some woofing in years past of like, working on farms in New Zealand and in parts of Europe. So I got exposure to growing food in that way, and permaculturists and homesteaders. So all of that kind of leading up to like, what is it? I don't want to go back to school to be an architect. I don't want to be a planner. But that's where I started to have this imagination. I asked my realtor who had helped me buy my first home, do you think I could be a realtor and also help people do A, B, C, and D? And that was help them cultivate food on their property, find and access non-toxic materials for their home, design more efficiently, and all the things like, were already there, the inklings that that's where I was going. I had read Bill McDonough's book, Cradle to Cradle, back in, I don't know, like 97 when it was first released or something. And that and his principles like were just so stuck in me and so resonated that also kind of guided my design sense and applied to everything. Like, how can this kind of ethos then carry that ethos? And if I'm in a realtor seat, would I be able to help people see the world in that way and make decisions with that worldview? And he said, you could, but there's probably not a market for it. But because he said I could, and I felt like I could try, I just tried it. So I decided to get a real estate license at that point in 2004. And my daughter was born in May of 2004. I was licensed in June of 2004. And I finished that school year in June and immediately just switched hats of being a parent and now a brand new licensed realtor with the stamp.
2004 in Portland with
Right,
a brand new real estate license and a baby to really kick you into high gear. What does the landscape look like at that time? Was there firms that you could mentor with to help you on this path around gardening and healthy lifestyles and community?
The short answer is yes, I did find one, but I interviewed with 13 brokerages and kept getting kind of shined on, kind of feeling of like, we can make a place for you and kind of, yeah, we'll support this weird idea you have of how you want to work in real estate, but nothing really had the teeth to it. And I kept resisting signing on and hanging my license with different offices. Sometimes they would be very thoughtful and make an introduction to someone. Maybe this person, I know them a little bit. Maybe but they don't work with new realtors. And then I just kind of get moved along. And after really months of seeking it out, on a last ditch effort, asking a contractor friend of mine, did he have anyone, he could think of? And I landed with a group called Roots Realty, which was a very small firm with an amazing couple who, life partners who ran the business together. And Michelle was my principal broker and mentor. And really, actually, before she took the interview, she said she's not hiring and she doesn't want to take on new brokers. So they like keeping it small and intimate. But we resonated enough in that conversation that she changed her mind. And I worked with her and she decided to mentor me. She really did want to mentor me too. It was very clear that she wasn't going to just let me kind of drift in real estate and kind of find my feet on my own. She was very intentional and extremely knowledgeable, high integrity, and just like held my feet to the fire. Like, if you're going to do this, that's great that you have all these other visions, but you need to know the inner workings of this contract and our documents and process and really understand your role. And she took it so seriously. And it was a little intimidating at first because I was such a trusting person to see so many things in real estate that are geared towards keeping people honest as opposed to assuming people are honest. So I had to really shift and kind of like come into that, like, oh, I need to really learn to be a good risk manager on behalf of my clients. But sometimes people do things even with the best intentions that end up being, harmful in various ways in transactions. And so she really taught me a lot of the ropes, and I give her so much credit. So yes, I did find one. And, she and her partner were longtime vegan and organic gardeners. And I would say just kind of lived and breathed in a kind of a permaculture way. That design principles felt very embedded and integrated into them and how they lived and worked. So I was very fortunate to land there. And she allowed me to put on my business card that I'm a realtor and eco design consultant. And she didn't squash that when I did the business card review in the office. Before I could put it out, I had to have her approval. uh, yeah. So I just made up that title, eco design consultant, and said, this is what I want to do. This is the best I can name it, having never done a certification again. I was such a voracious learner and just always put myself in learning situations and working with contractors or learning about materials and systems. And that I had faith that I would be responsible and let people know when I don't know what I don't know, and just like kind of grow into that title. So that's the way I kind of birthed that, of being in real estate while wearing another hat of really wanting to help people make informed decisions to align with their values.
It's interesting that I think we still see this within our Latitude change agent community, is like the hyphenated realtor and this, because I can certainly attest to this personally, that I hold a real estate license, but don't quite identify as a realtor. This is what my occupation is. How did it start to coalesce with this eco design consultation piece within the transaction? Were people finding you? Was this something that you cultivated a community of people that were like-minded already? Like what does that progression look like as you go from brand new into the industry into, this is where I'm really charting my professional vocation?
Yeah, I think this is where being an openly curious and honest about not knowing things kind of person really paid off for me. That I would follow my curiosity, and I would see someone, publish something that they're doing a talk somewhere in town at Portland Community College on something. And I'd go to their talk and I just go up and introduce myself. And at that point, I was just getting to know people who I wanted to partner with and know that we could develop a mutual relationship of supporting each other as professionals in the community, holding different expertises. So I would have different designers, materials experts, solar experts, and mechanical system experts, general contractor experts who knew all those different special subcontractors in town. And there was a small group of us that got together and said, what do we want to do together to really grow this market transformation that we were sensing? There's no real aggregator where the general public can come to know all these specialists that are emerging. Back in 2005 is when the first Green Home Forum was birthed, when a group of, it was one person from the Office of Sustainable Development, one in solar and energy consulting, one in home design, one a business consultant, a representative from Portland Community College, their maybe sustainability advisor at the time, and myself were kind of the core team that guided, let's do a series and we'll call it the Green Home Forum, invite the public. And because we had someone from PCC in our core group, we were gifted some spaces at PCC. And they said once a month we could use this lecture hall and these classrooms at this central hub, kind of on the central east side, near OMSI, if you're familiar with Portland. So we put it on the calendar and said, let's invite. I remember one of the first attendees was Coho Construction, led by Dave Heslem, who then went on to become and still the executive director of Earth Advantage. And then we had this roofing expert who did really funky earth. He was actually from Czech Republic and really came to the States with this ethos of just timeless buildings that are meant to last generations. And what about a roof that lasts 150 years? So he was passionate about that. So I remember he was one of our speakers. Then we had a couple of the other organizers who were, very influential. And so we gave kind of an opening spiel about what we're trying to cultivate and create here. And then this is where I first learned about open space. Then we said to the group, we ended up having like 60 people show up to this very first thing. We invited people through our own networks. 60 people show up. And then we said, based on these panelists sharing these like little 5-minute snippets of their role in this emerging ecosystem of sustainable design and building in Portland, what are topics that are important to you? So we put them up on the board and said, in room number 4, we're going to have a talk about renewable energy sources and systems. On this talk, we're going to talk about working with a general contractor on thinking holistically about your home renovation. And in this, you're going to talk about education, through or the Office of Sustainable Development, and how can you create continuing education that's meaningful for the public. We did that in September through the school year every month. And through that, all of us as practitioners developed a name for ourselves. And the people who attended told their friends, said, there's this group of people who are really trying to move the needle on how we transform our real estate and our homes in Portland. So that really launched me and a lot of us. Could track back our businesses. That was a real pivotal moment where we kind of gathered and convened those curious people on the kind of the early adopters and gave them a place where they could find resources. And it was valuable, mutually beneficial and valuable to all of us. And I feel like we all flourished as a result of that.
What an incredible journey to go on, not only to cultivate the field within a particular location, but to also really jettison your own education and learning. Because I think that's another thing for the industry is like somebody might be compelled towards saying, I'm an eco design consultant, but you quickly realize, like, am I an imposter by even saying that? How do I go source enough wisdom or in your case, relationships to possibly be in integrity to claim that?
Yeah. And I think because it was a group, I think we emboldened each other to make that first leap, to make that public. And so the other side of that, I'll say, is that was the public facing. And then we created Shop Talk, which was the professionals, where once a month we'd meet at the Eco Trust building in the atrium. We'd just claim a table from like 7 to 9 on like the first Wednesday of the month or something. We had some kind of reliable thing. And we did sometimes invite new people we met, like maybe someone would meet a new plumber who was interested in gray water systems. So they'd invite them and like, let's grow this, like this set of practitioners who we can rely on. Because if we're going to do adventurous stuff, we need people who are willing to adventure with us. And it was very self-organizing. I think it's because I was more on the role of like a resource keeper and connector person, that I was more inclined to be the one to put it on the calendar and make sure we have the place, time, and place to gather the people. And as opposed to like an expert in renewable energy and holding that seat, I was holding the relationship seat of how do we maintain and nurture these relationships and grow them and invite new people into relationship in this professional community. And that's all it took, was just plan it on the calendar, knowing that we'd at least have a critical mass of people who really wanted to move this forward, that it had momentum of its own, that it was in that life cycle where there was so much will to create and desire to do things differently, that it was that kind of like when you feel like you're in the flow with where life wants to go, that there's natural energy for it. No one was forcing anyone to do anything, all voluntary, above and beyond, because we all wanted to move it in a direction it wasn't going. So that that's just like kind of being in the right place at the right time and choosing to step in, and all of us kind of doing that collectively. That there's a mystery to that, like how that happens. We can't point to any one of us that really made that happen. It's just we collectively agreed, let's do this, and it was powerful. And there were many builders who got their start in that, or other subcontractors who got their start out of support from that network.
Let me riff on this for a second, because this is something that I want to get your thoughts on, of this aliveness within a community that you're inviting others to be a part of, that has this real regenerative feeling to it, versus where I see a lot of the industry right now, especially around the moniker of green real estate, of let me tell you and try to convince you this is what you need to do because of cost savings or because of a healthy material. Like it might even be really good things that we need to do for climate change adaptation or just living adaptation in general. But I can think of like, we're going to do an induction cooktop cooking demonstration and try to convince you of why you need to go towards this electric application. What do you, can you compare and contrast
Mm.
these two different branches of a community-based approach versus really where you see the dominant culture that's latched on to, we need to do something, so we're going to try to force them through this, like,
Mm.
let's ring the bell.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, it may be oversimplified to say like being motivated out of fear and motivated out of love or life force, like genuine desire to move in a direction, as opposed to being fearful of like, it's all going to go to shit if we don't do something now. That can have a limited kind of motivation to it, in my opinion. And we tend to kind of narrow our perspective towards what's going to solve it fast. What's the silver bullet? What's the thing? And where that can get urged motivation and innovation in a narrow space, like maybe that pushes electrification, which is very, has a lot of force behind it right now. But I think there's something about kind of taking an ecological or holistic view that I think inherently kind of steps out of that, like in a river that has that like force through this like narrow gap, and seeing like that there might be other ways that this water is going to get to that end place, and it may create these tributaries on the side. And I'm sure there are a lot of metaphors I could lean on for this, that where life often isn't channeled through this like single channel, where it finds its way and there's a broader picture to be had. And how can you like kind of take new perspectives? And I find the regenerative movement in all across all domains tends to choose a different witnessing point of relating to where life is going, and still acknowledges catastrophe and urgency and things that are devastating to life, but tries to look at it from multiple vantage points and not quickly go to the narrow single solution, and hold a bigger view. And there's a little bit of trust, I don't know, maybe it's faith and or trust, and testing out experiments. Like, what if we ask new questions that help us see this from a different angle, and having enough thought partners that are willing to kind of hold it loosely. And like when you have that soft gaze of looking at something instead of that narrow focus where you kind of lose your decision making, you only have one pursuit and one aim, but be able to take in the field and really sense little movements that are happening. Actually, there's more life here and more vitality than we sensed. When we zero in right here, we can see the devastation and how catastrophic it looks in this aperture. But when I take in the hold, actually, there's some real good work going on over here. How do we amplify that work? Oh, there's really good work happening that's maybe not in the hardware of our lives, of mechanical systems and infrastructure, but in the soft skills of what about all the communities that are investing in nonviolent communication and restorative justice and community building skills, and how do we live with each other? Even if we solve all those things, but we don't have the capacity to be in relationship with each other, then we've got past that one rough pot of the river, and now we're still stuck at odds with each other with only polarizing communication styles. We don't know how to harmonize in the end. So we still suffer. So I feel like there's something about that ability to hold a bigger picture and kind of suspend wanting to decide on a single solution, that where, and I don't want to say that sustainable movements and green movements always do that, but there's more of a propensity to kind of being good with a hammer and wanting to use your hammer, or being good at this particular solution and making that solution better. And that's good to move that forward. But I still see it on a bigger map and a bigger playing field or ecosystem. And that's where I really appreciate the more holistic viewpoints and lines of inquiry that I sense in the regenerative spaces.
How do you
Yeah.
develop that practice? I mean, I find that is a very advanced practitioner perspective, to be able to hold generativity and question inquiry rather than prescription of here's what we need to do. That doesn't come overnight.
Yeah. It's interesting. Like in this moment, I kind of think, I wonder if if it's beneficial if everyone does that, or the realtor or our consultant is in a role where it's more beneficial to hold a broad picture, as opposed to if I'm an HVAC contractor I really need to be the best and do whatever's best at that moment, the best practice in my lane. Like, do we all evolve further if everyone holds a different line of questioning? Or is it a little bit of a mix of some really, really narrow focus, specialized, like beeline practitioners, and then some that kind of hold this kind of connective tissue, dancing on the perimeters and kind of like shepherding the big picture? I'm not sure. But in terms of cultivating that, I think because I'm a relational person, that I naturally think relationally, meaning my life is better when I think in relationships, and I appreciate when my relationships are healthy. So from that, just like quality of my own day-to-day existence, I think informs how I want everything to be, perhaps. And this is a little bit of thinking out loud, of just kind of maybe learning something about myself in the moment. That being a relational person who really feels the most ease and connectiveness when my relationships are healthy, and I know that I'm in good reciprocity with my relationships, that I feel like that's inherently a trust in a collective, that I know that I'm not choosing to do everything myself and be a solution or the solution, or one kind of choose, like there's a single point that's going to make everything better, but that in somehow always navigating towards harmony. I feel like there's something about that where that has really guided so many other perspectives, because just at the end of the day, like I know that for me to sleep well, I kind of almost have a sense of, am I in good relationship with my relations, with my wife, with my daughter, with my parents, with my friends, with my colleagues, with my community? And I kind of know where the reciprocity is off. So just having that orientation and trying to nurture and take care in a collective way, it's kind of hard for me to think any other way, because it's such a fundamental piece for me.
Do you have that same sense of right relationship with land and place as well?
Good question. I think there's a little bit of a lot of I don't know in that answer. Like, I really don't know. Am I like I try to sense, like, am I really in integrity and being in right relationship with where I am and my relationship to the land that I benefit from and that I have relationship with? Just holding the questions makes me feel like I'm going a good direction, that I'm not making assumptions, that I know what's best for this land, that I'm curious and feel like I sense and listen and observe. And I definitely don't rush to decisions about how I interact with my place, but I feel like deep listening is a huge part of my relationship with my place. And that's a hard one, because obviously it's not language listening, but it's multisensory listening, and just kind of humbling myself to just be in it and not needing to make any decisions about it, but just being in relationship with it. And I think anytime I feel myself get ambitious, I really take note, meaning like I want to change this and I feel ambitious about it. Like, ooh, where's that coming from? Like, am I sensing that that's what this really calls for? Or is it something that's going to make me feel better, that I've created something and I put my mark on it for the sake of me feeling like I put my mark on it? So there's a little bit of that, like, just kind of, I think ambition is mysterious. And I kind of come back to that sense of awe that I felt on that road trip. And I feel that a lot. And I feel like that also is a way of what I perceive as right relationship. At least, I don't even know right, because I don't know who's calling it right, but I feel like I feel right when I feel awe and reverence towards my place. And kind of putting myself in, I like in some indigenous cultures where they talk about, Earth as grandmother, not just mother, but grandmother. Something about that feels like an archetype that I can relate to in a way that, like, this place obviously has more wisdom than I do. And how do I really just humble myself to listen better and attune better. That's my best attempt at right relationship, and I don't know if it's right or not, but it's my orientation towards wanting to. That's the best way I can express it right now.
Yeah, so many things are coming up. I mean, yesterday we had a great call with Soraya and Matthew Snyder out of Atlanta that was talking about how we are a part of an intelligent system. We are not the
Yeah.
intelligence within the system. We were on a call earlier today that you dropped a little tidbit that really was so innocuous, but kind of blew us all away. And this is saying something to have like a professional designer in the group that was like, that's a really good idea. You had talked about you have a dedicated sketchbook just for your home. And I'm curious, if you were to crack that open, what would be in that sketchbook?
Good question. Yeah, that's fun. Oh man, there's a little bit of anything from sketches of just like what's here, layouts of where things are in relation to each other, so I kind of have a mental map and a clearer sense of just spatially what's here. Then there are details of transitions in physical space. Like, this is a little clunky and a little clumsy. I think we can make this more fluid, just in terms of the built space. So there will be structural drawings. There's kind of an inventory of things I learn about of what's here. Like, we have this peach tree that the previous owners planted that we thought would not thrive, and this year it's has some beautiful fruit coming in. And there's also sometimes lists of like, oh, and this is where it's kind of like an intermediate step of before I get too ambitious, where I'll have a list of, wouldn't it be amazing if we had elderberry and this and that and all these certain plants that I've loved in the past in other settings and other places. And I don't know yet, do they have a place here? So I allow myself that as a way to kind of get desires out, or kind of these little passions I have for certain plants or design ideas that may be really fun design ideas, but in the end, they'll live in the sketchbook and I'll never actually apply them to my home or land, because they end up not having that sense of belonging. Like, oh, that really, something clicks into place where that makes perfect sense in this place. Like, life is better with that thing, as opposed to it's just nice to have, or kind of I can pat myself on the back for a cool design idea. So I think a lot of it allows me, almost like a journal allows me to get thoughts out. The sketchbook allows me to get things out without having to build all the things or plant all the things, not knowing if they're actually appropriate. So I get to kind of dream, I guess, if I were to sum it up. But then also I do stumble on a little area that I kind of start to get a sense of, and then I can refine it and write about it or draw it or sketch it and iterate without having to plant and replant, but really kind of get a sense of it first and give myself a map to walk through in my mind's eye. Like, how would this actually function if I did actually plant in this way? So it's a little bit of that sandbox play space where I can mess around and not feel like I'm going too quickly to that kind of human ambition to change a place.
Yeah, design is play.
Yeah.
There's a couple things. First, for the listeners, I just want to underscore that David is no longer in Portland, but is dialing in from the Hudson Valley in Kingston. Is that right?
Yeah, just outside of Kingston. Yeah, the mid Hudson Valley on the west side of the river. Kind of in the foothills of the Catskills. Or within short range of trailheads, and yeah.
And so to weave this back in, this approach towards a practice around how we inhabit our homes and our habitats, you have transitioned into different places, but you're still following a very similar process, and you're still working with clients. And I'm kind of swinging in this other direction of like, outside of your own practice with your own home and your own land, what are some of these examples of projects that you feel were highlight within your career?
I think one that comes to mind as a highlight, where more the design consulting was present, both real estate and the consulting, would be the attempt at the Living Building Challenge in Portland, which is a very rigorous building standard, as people in that space know. To do that within city limits of Portland, brought together architects who had that longing to contribute on a project like that, plumbers who were willing to look at very odd gray water and composting toilet systems, on down the line, to like landscape designers who were looking at rooftop habitats, beekeeping in an urban environment, gray water systems and plantings for constructed wetlands of sorts, and a homeowner and general contractor was willing to hold all those pieces and the complexity of that. To get through that project, to have it occupied and go through even the testing regimen that's needed for a Living Building Challenge. So for that, we're building towards net zero energy and net zero water. So having multiple consultants, not just the plumber, but the consultant to say, who's more of a hydrologist and a civil engineer, and say, how much water are we going to capture on 1,600 square feet of roof in an average Portland year? What type of cistern will we need? What type of water system will we need to make that potable? Does all of it need to be potable? Or all these layers of questions that continually involve multiple stakeholders and experts, but to kind of navigate that through. And then also feel, I think, the highlight and kind of the little thing that, even though we didn't meet it, it was only because of kind of like human delight that our owner wanted a cat door in an envelope that was made to be so airtight and like such an advanced mechanical system that we were commissioned to design the most airtight cat door that would, open with a little, a cat just able to open it, but also able to seal enough that it kind of, honored the air membrane that we were so sensitive to. There's something that, even though it didn't meet the end criteria of that final certification because of all these other things that were true to the actual occupying of the space, I think it was just kind of charming in a way to me, where and I can say that because I wasn't hanging my hat on the ability to meet that challenge and be certified. So I do honor people who tried to meet that certification and what an achievement that would have been. But anyway, it was still like a real highlight to just work on such a beautiful process. And that was from the point, with that client, it was from selling her previous home, having that dream, finding land that was suitable for that type of project, and then helping assemble the team on through to giving those tours to people wanting to tour a Living Building Challenge project in its completion, when it's fully occupied. So really just being able to carry that full arc from beginning to end felt really rewarding. That's one that comes to mind.
I've heard that story about the cat door told through a mutual friend of ours, James Arnold, with JRE Green Building, where he's like, we built this incredibly high performance home, and the lady would just keep her door open to let her cat in and out, and it screwed everything up.
Yeah. It's frustrating and completely sweet, and just our relationships to non-humans, and like to invest that much money and still give that much value to your other relationships is I don't know, I kind of like it. Yeah.
So I just mentioned James, and James was a neighbor of mine whenever I lived in Portland, and we had, I guess, the pleasure as well as the displeasure of essentially pandemicking together.
Right.
We would consider our families part of our same bubble because he lived right down the street, and we were really gnawing on these big questions around regeneration. And he's like, "You need to meet David Todd. You need to meet my buddy David Todd. David's been talking about this for a long time." And I was like, "Well, let's meet David Todd." And he's like, "No, David's gone. David's in New York or somewhere right now, or Ohio. I'm not really sure." But whenever we finally did connect, I don't even think it was through James. You had a mortgage broker's license.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering, what was the entry path into that career shift?
Fair question. Yeah, that was an interesting chapter. When I left Portland, I left real estate for a period of time on kind of an unknown sabbatical, whether it would be a boomerang sabbatical coming back into the same field, or kind of a one-way ticket in a new direction. I didn't know. And in that time, I had this, after a little breathing room between being in real estate full time, I had this feeling like finance was always an obstacle. We always struggled. Like, what was so hard conveying the value to lenders? Why don't they want to work with us and be innovative? And there were a few along the way that would kind of take a stab at it and try to think outside the box. But by and large, like, we looked far and wide. So I basically had, like, I'm at a moment in my career where I am at kind of like a still point, and I can go in any direction. And I had saved enough to be able to do that and just kind of have this moment of, all right, if I'm going to carve out a new path, this is a need. So what if I train as a mortgage broker and really know like what they're up against? Like, what is it like to sit in that seat and have these wacky proposals thrown at you for net zero buildings that are using things that totally blow out like how we think about square footage and all the things. So I really just wanted to know better, and had the dream of finding kindred spirits in that field, like I had kind of found adjacent kindred spirits in real estate. What about on that side? Like, what if I find people who are in finance who also want to innovate and are also hungry for that next innovation that would really unlock community developments that were kind of fumbling because banks don't understand what they are and how to value them. So I trained in that and acted as a mortgage broker, as a loan officer on a team with a mentor, and I had good training and really felt like I learned the ropes and learned all the systems and all the underwriting guidelines that were reinforced by the secondary loan market, mortgage market, and being able to resell loans, and just really got to see how boxed in lenders typically are. So it ended up being a good exercise in learning from the inside. And in the end, I didn't love it as much as the role I got to play as a realtor, where I felt like I was not in the same seat of being able to be a resource to my clients. I was a little more in this quick transactional exchange about like, just get the loan done. And even when they knew that I had all these other interests and capacities and networks that they could tap into, I didn't have the same relationship and rapport and sense that I could impact how they were going to occupy that place that they were excited to buy, how they were going to start relating to that community, how they were going to start, transforming that place. It just became too short of a runway to be with someone, too short of a relationship building place where it just never felt like it had the teeth and the gravity that I felt when I was in that journey as a realtor, where we're more intimate with like those desires that clients hold and the longing to create different kind of types of spaces for them and their families. So that's where it didn't meet my expectations and hopes of creating community around innovative finance. And I didn't get to do the things I got to do before. And at that point, I was in relationship with Latitude and found that there are these, like you and our colleagues who we get to share community with, who are really doing the type of real estate that I always wanted to do in community, where I often felt like the lone realtor doing those things in Portland, where I felt like I had great support of contractors and real estate adjacent people. But actually, as a realtor, I didn't always feel that type of camaraderie that I now feel. So that was also the allure. It made it easier to step back into a realtor seat and get licensed in New York, is to know that I'd be in really thoughtful community holding the big questions that I've been holding and more, and just like from different angles and from different bioregions, and just like so rich that it just made that venture into finance start to lose steam and lose gravity, and just feel I can be more impactful on the side of telling good stories about what place could be, attracting people who really want that in their lives, and showing an investor or a finance person that there are 40 people who want to live in this way in this community. They're ready, and please finance this project, that we have kind of a critical mass who desire this thing that I know you don't understand, but that we can prove the demand from a different seat in this whole ecosystem of how we transform place. So that was the kind of full circle, venturing into that lane for a while, and that side of the table, and then back again.
Now that you're back, you're in a new place. With your ear to the ground, to the community, what seems to be coming up right now for you? Is there a theme? I mean, it seems like there's always, you gravitate towards what you love. There's part of that, but there's also this like real emergence that's coming out from what's going on with the times. What are you seeing right now?
Yeah, you're right. It is. I acknowledge it's both because what I'm seeing emerge is a desire for, the umbrella term might be intentional community, just mm, that pre-existing neighborhoods may not have had the design of intentionality that some people are craving. So either how to transform existing communities or to create communities anew, guided by intentions of cohabitating and relating to that place in a different way. And that's in the form of, I have, probably 3 dozen people in the Hudson Valley who have approached me with some form of community that they want to create. And each one of them represents 2, 3, or 4 couples that little node is holding a vision for, whether it's this one wants a biodynamic eco village. This group wants to live in a micro community of tiny homes. This one wants to live in an agri-hood and they want it to be big enough to support teachers and they want affordable housing. So there's all these different like permutations of and scopes of vision that I'm just getting inundated. And right now, my challenge is to learn how to sense the connections between them because I sense that they don't know each other. That I tell them that this isn't the first time someone's come to me with this longing. I know a lot of other groups like this. And I ask for permission. Can I share about your vision with these other groups when I sense a connection? And then I kind of know, like I have this kind of mental map, and now I had to write it out because it just got too cumbersome. There's so many people that it's clearly emerging. It's not just my personal love of community and longing for designing intentional community, that I'm surrounded by it. And it's so hopeful for me because it feels like it has different momentum to it than before, where this has been true. Like community is not a new thing. Obviously, people have lived in community. It's just foolish to even say how long we've lived in community. But to use our lived experience and kind of shared wisdom around what would make it more mutually supportive and meaningful to live in community. How can we design for that? So even if we move on, that place that we made is so clearly designed for community interaction and nurturing community that anyone could just slide in and just see like, oh, I see how this place makes sense and how it nurtures my relationship with the garden there, and then the neighbor on the other side of that garden, and we cross paths daily, and we have these shared spaces that we all value. Just how do we create that design so people holding that in all different permutations just feels like the bubbling up. And this is like, talk about mycelial network. This is mushrooms all across the Hudson Valley that just want to blossom and bloom. And yeah, it feels rampant, frankly. There's a community here that has invited me to speak on regenerative real estate back in June, and we had a great turnout and great response, and it was very alive in that community that people there have this vision. And there's a call to meet again and a real desire, like, when are we going to meet again? When can we move this forward? So what I'm feeling called to is that to be a convener where these communities get to meet each other and see, do our visions match? Maybe there's more critical mass when we bring everyone together and see that there are actually 3 communities, not 36 communities, that there are 3 kind of areas of passion and desire and vision that make sense together. And like maybe this is where we can really show this critical mass to an investor and say, here are mature adults who have willingly kind of gone outside the norm and said, what's out there doesn't suit us, but we want to create something very special. So here we are. Let's paint a picture. And I want to help paint that picture to get these off the ground. And I feel like that's very alive here. I'm super excited about it. And I feel like more and more the team, the professional ecosystem is more and more alive. Just like, feel like my roots are spreading here in the Hudson Valley. So something is afoot, Neil.
This
Yeah.
That was an incredible witness that I think everybody gets to partake in, of just like David's zone of genius. And while it's not in the rear view mirror, it's happening in real time.
Mm.
To be able to make that connection between how you brought community together before to create the conditions that had so many different offshoots in the Portland area that spills outside of the borders of just that city, but then to watch this emerge in a new place that you get to play in and design and bring people together. And it's certainly worthy of a second chapter in the future as this unfolds, because I get a front row seat at this and other people don't, and I know that they would, because this is coming up in the Hudson Valley. It's coming up where we are on the West Coast, and I think it's coming up across the world to a large degree. Of what does this look like in community, and how do we adapt what's come before us and what we've inherited to what needs to come anew. And so with this, David, I'm looking at the clock, and I'm wondering if there's any concluding thoughts around, I don't know, the relevancy of the industry, or anything else might be coming up for you right now.
Well, yeah, I think there's something about that. We're in this kind of edge of where finance is tricky, and we're in a capitalist society, alongside things that want to thrive, and that it feels limited by existing systems. That kind of friction, I think, is a really creative tension. And I just would really love partners who want to live in that creative tension of, like, let's not shy away from it. Let's use our expertise in our own zones of genius to create, and like use our power that we have, and not shy away from these challenges, to just like see it as a challenge. Like we talk about this challenge of imagination, like how can we bring even more sparkle and imagination to this, where we've kind of like locked down and got narrow in our kind of thinking around it and our question asking around, and ask better questions. So I really, even though I said earlier about how I shied away from business, I think embracing that we are in business of creating a marketplace is where communities get their needs met. Without it, we would all be homesteaders, self-sufficient, and not needing to meet our needs relying on a market. So let's like allow ourselves to be in that tension of being in a marketplace that isn't perfect, but still striving towards that like beautiful potential that we have, and just continue to just challenge, to ask better questions, and just strengthen our imaginations, collective imaginations. So that's where I'm fired up.
That's beautiful. That is beautiful. David, thank you for being a leader in this space. He's been holding regenerative real estate since before he was probably even calling it regenerative real estate. Everybody. Yeah, it's a real treat for me to be able to work with you and just see how you're operating, and take a lot of good notes from that. So David, thank you for coming onto the podcast for the first time, and it certainly will not be the last time.
Thank you, Neil. It's a pleasure.
If you want to follow our work at Latitude, you can follow us on Instagram at latitude.regenerative.re, and mine is at I am Neil Collins. We inherently believe in the potential that comes from connecting value-aligned and purpose-driven people together in community. That's why I encourage you to join our mighty network and introduce yourself to the other people working across the globe to advance a more regenerative, resilient, and beautiful world. Here, we want to know what you're working on and what inspires you. Through this platform, you can attend live events, take courses provided by our podcast guests, and create connection with other people and businesses that share your same passion. To join, find the link in our show notes or visit our website at chooselatitude.com. If you'd like to support the show, please share it with your friends and be sure to follow us on your podcast app so that you always have the latest episode downloaded. Another way to support our regenerative field building is to leave us a rating and review on Apple Podcasts. Positive ratings help attract amazing guests, and they can be the deciding factor for someone else to tune in and listen. And who knows, maybe this is the kind of motivation that it takes for them to finally decide to align their profession with their sustainable and regenerative values and become a positive force for good within their own community. This show was produced by myself and edited by Anthony Wallace and offered as a part of our work with Latitude Regenerative Real Estate.